Hello, everyone. B. Alfred Ostrowski here, and in this recording, I'm going to be giving a tutorial / demonstration of the installation and running of HardHat in conjunction with React.js on an Amazon EC2 C5 instance. Doing a introductory blockchain hello world style tutorial. So let's get started. Here, I'm assuming just an Amazon account and a PPK key and knowledge of running a PuTTY client. Okay, so I'm at the EC2. If you don't know how to get to EC2, you can just search on EC2. We'll get you there. And as I'm doing right here, right? So I can click in and get to the EC2 dashboard. We've run instances. And I'm going to run a fresh instance, do the installs, start up, explain all the code right from scratch. So I'm going to choose a Ubuntu instance and just use the default 2204. I'm going to need a C5 instance to run this example. Can't get away with the lower tier instances. I need a little more horsepower to run the blockchain personal blockchain simulation that HardHat is going to give me. So I do a C5, and now all I have to do is set up my key pair, which I already have that set up. So documentation is very straightforward if you haven't before, and do a launch instance and watch this up and run. So I'm going to bring up two terminals to this instance that's up and running already. Before I do that, I'm going to set the security rule because I'm running the React.js application. I need an appropriate inbound rule so I won't get a 404 error. So just click on security. Scroll this down a little bit on the bottom here. Oh, I'm sorry, just click on the security rules. And I'm going to edit inbound rules. Here I only have a default to secure shell. I'm going to bump that up to all traffic. IP4, I'm not too worried about extensive security because I'm just using this as a sandbox. So that should be good. I can go back to instances. And in this case, I'm going to want my IP information. So I'm going to click back to details right here and grab my public IP. And let's start a PuTTY session. So I'm going to set up two PuTTY sessions, one to run my HardHat personal blockchain and the second to run React. But first, I'm just going to get both of them up and running using our tried and true PuTTY and pull in the PPK key that I've generated. I always set 30 on the timeout because otherwise I get timeout errors sometimes. I'm going to bump up the font to make it a little bit easier to read. And we're going to be running that blockchain instance in the background so we can see the updates as it's happening, right? So I got one up, so let me get another up here and running, and we can start to install our software. So we're going to be up pretty fast with this. We don't have a lot of software, a lot less than if I was running Ganache. I grab my address again for some reason. There we go. One more time, set my font, and away I go. So I don't have any permissions, just log in with the regular Ubuntu and I'm good to go, just like usual. So I got my two screens up and now I'm just going to cut paste my commands. All this is going to be available below at the specified GitHub. And you can just go to the README install and cut and paste along with me. Of course, the beauty of using the Amazon instance is that it should work exactly the way that I've run it, as long as you're running everything the same, right? And this should give a lot of advantages over with my personal experience running in the tutorials that exist online, that they're on a slightly different architecture, then you have some incompatibilities, right? So here I'm not going to do a normal npm install on Node.js because it's going to give me a lower version. So I installed 14. They typically describe Node 16 or higher. This one worked for me, and I did want to go again with the default with a typical npm install. So I downloaded install script, and now I'm going to run that for Node.js. I'm going to default the prompt and let it run. I'm going to use Web3 in my React application as opposed to Ethers. I had some errors with Ethers, so I went back to my tried and true Web3 library. So that's going to be my next install here. npm install. And next up, I'm going to install the HardHat libraries. So I do an npm install, Nomic Labs, HardHat Ethers, and the HardHat Waffle, and Ethereum Waffle, and Chai. So a little bit more than what I need for a Hello World, but hopefully working towards a standard installation for future content that is going to be relying on HardHat. It's going to give me a lot of more capability as far as forking and a lot of more advanced topics with more advanced blockchain applications, right? So, all right, so that's installed. And now my last install, I'm going to put in the Create React app, and I'm going to be using that. So again, I did everything here at the home Ubuntu directory. I didn't do a special project directory for this. Advantage to that is I could use this for multiple projects on the same node if you're so inclined. Here I'm just using it as a default sandbox, but trying to establish a little means of best practice running these applications on AWS EC2. So this will complete very quickly, and so NPX is giving me the advantage of both installing it and running it at the same time, right? So here I'm creating a project directory that's simply called hello. So it should be up and running soon here. There we go. So I have my hello directory created. And now in this case, I want to do the complete HardHat installation. I'm going to do npx HardHat. Please take note, I am running this. I'm going to overlay the terminals here for easier reading. I CD'd directly into my project directory, right? So npx HardHat, and this is going to bring up the full HardHat installation. I'm going to pretty much default everything here. Create JavaScript. I'm going to ask for the JavaScript project. Leave that. It's prompting me for the project root. That's going to be my project directory created from the Create React, home Ubuntu hello, and add a get ignore and the crash reports and the project dependency. So I pretty much defaulted everything with that. So I have 4 files I'm going to be modifying, and we're going to be up and running our application. I'm going to be cut pasting those files, and I am going to explain everything that I've changed line for line. So here I have HardHat installed now at that project directory, and also want to make a note, I'm going to be running my node directly out of this project directory. If I ran it at the home Ubuntu, then it's would not know where to find it, right? So you want to keep your directories, track of them, so you know where to do what. A lot of tutorials don't specifically go through that. So the next change I'm going to do is HardHat config. So I'm going to bring that up right now. And you see I have a very minimal default. Now, depending on the functionality that you're looking for, there is a lot of things that you may be adding moving forward with the HardHat. Here, let me just blow this away. I'm going to pull in my own file from my GitHub. And again, it's going to be available. And let me just copy this in to spare you the pain of watching me doing a lot of typing and mistakes. And we'll step through this line for line here. So just copy it, make sure I have it in here. So I do a require the HardHat toolbox. And then the exports, I have a artifacts file. So artifacts is going to carry the contract address and the contract ABI, okay, which is my JSON specified interfaces and definitions for my smart contract. Artifacts, here I'm defining stored under sources. The reasoning here is that I can easily pull that out of source. So with a web application, full stack developers know you can only have limited read-write access from a web application, right? Just by its inherent nature. So here, by defining it under a source directory, that means I can easily read and write. And in my application, I did a modification with the deployment script and the subsequent app.js file that I can pull this information directly in my program and not worry about cut pasting, okay, as you might see, and I still see in HardHat tutorials, right? You have to pull in that contract data and modify your file. So that is an unnecessary step, right? If you manage it within some small additions to your deployment, we'll look at that in a second. But this is setting that up. So I don't have a default source artifacts. This is going to actually create it. So I don't even have to worry about creating that directory. Then I have a networks file. So when I'm running an EC2 instance, everything is not going to be local. So I have to define the specific DNS for my local host. And unfortunately, if I'm running Amazon or some type of cloud-based information, I have to continually, most unfortunately, I have to update this all the time. So I have to keep an eye on this, especially if I go into a shutdown and startup, then I'm going to get another DNS from Amazon. So in this case, I copied in my DNS, as you just saw, from the EC2 screen. And I default chain ID. Okay, this is access for wallets. I'm not going to get into wallets in this tutorial. Just going to do the bare minimum, just pull my accounts and read the data, do the read and write to the blockchain. And I'll manage that in further content. But again, let's just keep it simple, get up and running with HardHat and React. So I default the chain ID, and this is a little bit vestigial. I'm not really relying on this HardHat definition here, but this is, again, default with HardHat. And I'm defining my Solidity version here as well. So that's one down. HardHat config, 3 more. I'm going to go to contracts. And in some installations I've seen, they give you some kind of greater hello world, but not in this case. So I created my own hello.solidity. They give you a lock solidity, which is not the best starting point in my opinion. So here, this is going to allow me to read and write to the blockchain and test that out appropriately. So I'm going to cut paste this in, and let's step through this line by line. For those of you who are already been doing blockchain, perhaps with Ganache, you should already have a good familiarity with it, but let's step through it. It's really quick, right? So Pragma Solidity giving me my version of Solidity 8089 or higher. That's what that's giving me, right? Now the contract is simply called hello, as is the file name. I have one public string. It's kind of called stored data. I have an event that don't necessarily rely on here, but I left this in from some prior examples that is generating an output. And I have a setGet function The set is reading in the string and assigning it to the public variable and emitting the event. The get subsequently is just reading that string and returning it is following the string memory definition. And there you go. So that's set up. Let's look at the deployment script. So I'm going to go to, I got two more, right? So I'm going to go back up and I'm going to go to scripts and I have a default deployment script for that lock file. And I'm not going to step through that. A little more intuitive version here. Again, it's all going to be available. So I'm just going to blow away what they have provided for me and copy my version. And we're going to step through this line by line, take a look at it. So again, the primary modification here is I'm going to take my contract address and ABI information and put it in a physically readable file and read it in from my React application. So I don't have to worry about getting it right. I don't have to worry about pasting my contract data, and we'll follow it through. But so here I read in HardHat under HRE definition library, and I use the get contract library hello, and I assign that to all caps hello. And then I do the actual deployment of that contract. And I have the asynchronous call here that's going to give me the weight, and that's going to allow me to access the address. So versions that I've seen in tutorials, they access this as a property that doesn't work on this version for me. So I have to use a get address method to access that. So I tested it out here, and I also assign that to a variable. And I'm going to pass that in with the name of the contract, the address, and the name that's going to give me access to the JSON-based information that I can put it in a place that my application can read it from, right? So here I'm going to do the save front end files, and that's going to read in that data here, the contract address and the name. And here it's going to create a new directory under source. In this case, it's going to be hello source contracts data. And I don't have to physically create it. It's going to create it for me. And I'm going to do a write. I'm going to write in the contract address under a JSON file using that contract address variable. And I'm also going to write in the contract ABI information. And that is listed as the artifact information. So artifacts is where HardHat is putting your data, right? So unlike, let's say, a build contracts directory that you might have with Ganache. So I have a main routine and handles any error handling there. And that's pretty much it. Should be good to go. So I got one more file. That's my application. So let's look at the create React app. So I'll go into source. Actually, I have React started. I could do an npm start, right? Let's just test it out just for fun. And I can run the default, and then we're going to go and change it and run our actual application. So I'm going to grab the DNS. Remember, I changed my security. If I didn't, then I'm going to have some challenge accessing it, right? So this is working, right? So I have React is running appropriately. And now I can shut it down. So now let's go in and modify it to support our blockchain application. Do app.js. And I'm going to blow away what they provided for me and copy in my own copy of stuff through the line by line. And then we're going to fire it up and watch it run after we do the deployment. Okay. The only thing I have to edit here is my DNS. So let me put that in so I don't forget. And then we're going to step through it line by line, and then we're going to start up our blockchain. Grab my DNS or my Amazon console. And again, you shut it down, start it up, you're going to have to, most unfortunately, pull that in, right? So I just saved it to be safe, and now let's step through the code. I'm importing React, pretty much standard. And I'm going to import Web3. Now here I'm going to do two imports. This is for the ABI information, the whole JSON that's going to be generated, and then a separate JSON that's going to have that contract address. I've seen this being pulled in some cases. I still see some examples that want you to hard code that contract data in there. So we want to avoid that, right? Because if you're doing multiple deployments, you need to continually pull that contract data, and oop, you missed it, then you're going to have to restart that process again. So this is going to save a lot of trouble desk checking and updating your code appropriately. I'm going to extend the component with class app, very standard React, and the component will mount. It's going to execute this before everything else, right? I want to access my backend data source, the blockchain, and set it up appropriately. Here, I just send in the console the address and the ABI information. And here I'm going to instantiate the access to my EC2 based HardHat personal blockchain, right? So I'm going to pull in the appropriate accounts and make those available as well. I'm going to do a set state on those with the necessary variables that's going to allow for access throughout the application, especially when you get into a little more detailed advanced implementations, right? And now I'm going to instantiate the contract, pulling in that ABI information from the file that's copied over with the deployment, and pass in the address as well directly in from my variable. I have the constructor that runs, and let's say I had some extra data in here by mistake. So this just initializes that. Then I have two handlers that is going to manage the set and get. And I'm going to be invoking them on this platform. I use the set state in my contract, and I have to define it as methods, okay, and the set information. And contract was defined up here, right? Just reading that in. As I do the send and the set information, I need to reference account. It's going to cost me money from my funny money HardHat installation, right? That's allocated to me. And I have the get, and then I have the rendering function, some standard HTML, and I have the form that's going to allow me to input a text string right to the blockchain, and another button that's going to read it and update it appropriately through the global variable that's set up. That's pretty much it. I should be good to go. So the next step I want to do is start up my blockchain, right? I want to bring up HardHat. And again, I'm going to be careful when I'm bringing that in. I'm going to do it under my project directory, not at any higher or lower. And I'm going to stage it with the DNS, right? So I'm going to pull in my DNS. And I could just type it, right? So it's an npx HardHat node, and I'm going to define host name and the appropriate DNS here. So HardHat looks good, right? it came up, and let's scroll it. So I have 20 counts, 0 index, 0 to 19, and it brought it up appropriately, and it allocated the 20 counts with 10,000 ETH. So I'm going to leave this up here so we can keep an eye on it and watch the updates as we follow through with our deployment and execution of our application. So let me go to hello here again, and I'm going to do a deployment npx HardHat run under the scripts. And again, I have to make sure I'm running it under the correct directory. And I'm going to access localhost as defined in the HardHat config file, right? So we run that, define the network as localhost, sorry. There we go. So I had lock and hello. So I have 2 contracts that are deployed. And this is a contract. We can look at that information and we notice in the background, looking good, right? I have an update to use some gas to manage the deployment. And it came back and recognized that, right? So that is looking good. So now let me start up my application. Actually, before we do that, let me go to the appropriate directory, and I can go to contracts data. And let's just make sure that that information, this is what the deployment script gave me. Okay, it's going to copy over the information. I could do a cat hello address JSON. And that is the address, right? That's right up here. So instead of taking this, editing my file, putting it in, okay, this is written to a JSON file. Most importantly, it's being stored under source that I have access for my application. That's to save me a lot of trouble, especially if I have multiple contracts, right? And let's take a look at hello JSON. So this is my ABI information, right? So ABI is it's kind of a messy JSON file, but this is going to give me all my information. And if you look at my scripting, we can script this out from the console if you really want to have a better feel of how to manipulate the data, right? But this is my JSON-based definition of the file. So this is the means of my application knowing how to match everything up appropriately. Most importantly, it's stored under source as opposed to where it is originally placed in artifacts, which is not accessible from app.js. So that's super important because you can't do it otherwise. So copying that order really makes this convenient. So now I can start my application up. And I set my DNS, I set my security rules. We've already tested it with the hello world with just the base React. So now let's take a look at our application here, see if we can read and write to the blockchain using our HardHat here, right? So I'm going to shrink this across because I want to see it update in the background, right? It's gonna. At least this half the screen, right? So I can see my application and I can see the background and the outside here. So it's touching the contract. I can just see the initialization here. Let me go to the developers console and I can see some of the console outputs as well, right? The developer tools. So use my Chrome, it's going to give a little bit better developer tool so we can watch that run appropriately. So here, I'm holding this copy. And I can pull up the tools here. So here I can see the whole address. And if you recall, it's the same address that's been brought in. ABI information is here as well. I can dig into any level of detail there. So Chrome gives me slightly a little bit better developer tools. So let me update that string. Let's do an update on the contract. You see in the background, gas use, the blockchain is being updated. And everything's looking good. Let me do another update. So let's just add some A's and B's to that. And I can even add C, whatever. Okay, and it's updating appropriately. I can do a get. And I can see my information is back up here. So there you have it. Went from a clean instance. We did an installation on HardHat in conjunction with React and set up our deployment scripts and smart contract, as well as the HardHat configuration, and of course my application. So, so there we are, up and running. Good luck with it. Thanks for listening. And all the information I just went through is going to be on the GitHub associated with this video. Thanks for listening. Take care.